doctors training and just the indoctrination of the whole population. We believe that we are these spacesuits and that's all we are, and that these pathogens are these invisible terrorists. So even with the most open-minded people, it's pretty hard to, get through those filters.
34.
But if we just want to keep it confined to that rudimentary, isolated area, the subject of many of the interviews I've been doing with people like Dr. Cowan and Dr. Hoffman, by the way, they just did an amazing joint little podcast together to counter some of the just some recent events that they've been exposed to, and it's marvelous and just puts everything in very clear light. But what we talk about is, in fact, this whole thing that we're afraid of is a theory, and according to their own scientific, and I use air quotes, around scientific, they haven't obeyed their own process, which is isolation, purification. So the whole thing is mythology. So there's no reason to cover up your face in the first place. Okay, so now that brings us to the subject is, what does a mask do? Well, it doesn't, let's just say their theory of this mythological virus, and we're hearing the same analogy all over the place, it's like trying to stop rain or something with a cyclone fence. So according to their own theoretical model, the microbe or viral size is just going to be able to sail right through the pores of those masks. So it's not doing anything to protect. The plexiglass thing that we encounter, I mean, all this stuff would be hilarious if it wasn't so tragic. I chuckle when I go into a store and see that. I mean, do they think that this little 2-foot square thing is going to prevent these creatures from finding a way around, underneath, over it, or from the sides? I mean, it's so ridiculous. We should feel very foolish. And by the way, I know for a fact that in certain circles, let's just say up on the so-called hierarchy, they're laughing their heads off at our stupidity. But the mask doesn't do anything to stop what they theorize is occurring. And then the most tragic part is we're walking around breathing our own exhaust. The respiratory system is the largest elimination process in our body, and with every expiration we're eliminating toxins, so it's really not a good idea to rebreathe that. And carbon dioxide isn't really the problem. I hear that a lot, but there's actually breathing techniques like the BUTERRAIN method that train you to build up carbon dioxide because that releases more oxygen from the cells. That's another tangent. But the real bad effects are rebreathing your own toxins. I think another tragic component of this is when I go into the stores, and there's always, where I live, it's a little bit more unique perhaps to where most people live, but there's always a few of us, at least a handful, wherever you go. You can even go into Home Depot or something, and even they say you got to wear a mask. We don't. And there's a few others, but most people are masked up. And when you're walking around, we make a point to just have big smiles and greet everybody with light coming out of our eyes. And people really react to that. And that's what people are really starving for, because our observation is really cutting off our humanity to each other. And it's also making certain people that believe in the mask much more rude, because nobody can see each other's faces. Nobody's getting eye contact anymore. Nobody's making that human connection. And I think the most serious consequences of it are more on that social, psychological, spiritual, interactive level that really is what makes all of us tick.
I think that may be one of the longest lasting side effects, regardless what may happen over the next year or two. The 6 feet of division between us, which is clearly echoing death ideas. We bury our dead 6 feet under, but Jason and I have done people where the human biofield, ideas about what that is and how it interacts when people get close to each other. But really, this is going to be one of the lasting things. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes people to get beyond these ideas. Oh, I know what I wanted to add. Jason, was it you and I? I think it was you and I were talking with someone who claimed that there's 20, I'm guessing at the numbers, 24% oxygen, and when you put on the mask within 5 minutes, it goes down to 14%. Was that something you and I did?
Somebody mentioned that, but I don't remember who it was.
Yeah, I don't either. Go ahead.
Well, perhaps Bear can tell us what the numbers should be on that. So the fear is the big thing. I completely agree with you that the controllers at whatever level are literally pointing and laughing at how the stupid sheep are just doing whatever they're told. And now they have their little monkey saying, you should wear 2 or 3 masks to make sure that you're truly protected. So they're just cranking it up, trying to see how stupid are these guys? And what do you actually think the long-lasting repercussions of the amount of fear that they're pumping out? Because that's the true weapon here. Screw the virus. The amount of social engineering damage being done is incalculable at this point.
Yeah, long-term repercussions, I would consider them the effects, the intended effects by the people that are perpetrating this whole thing. And to understand more intentions, then you have to understand the historical roots of the people behind it, which goes back to eugenics, the Royal Society, and the folks that really believe it is their prerogative to cull and control the herds because they are in a more elevated state of awareness, and that the rest of us do not have the right nor the ability to control our own affairs anyway. You know, there's so many consequences that we can't even conceive at this point, but there's a lot that we do know of that haven't made it into the dialogue yet. Let me give you one example. We're talking about the whole social ramifications of just separating ourselves off and not even being able to read people's facial expressions anymore. Well, that cut off from normal social interaction greatly affects an area of the brain we call the amygdala, and that is the part that is greatly activated in a very beneficial way when we have normal human intimacy and interactions. And when that doesn't happen, the amygdala suffers greatly, and the amygdala is right adjacent and continuous with another part of the brain called the hippocampus. And in the hippocampus, it is the center within our central nervous system that produces stem cells to regenerate our central nervous system. And that's very important because, like any other part of the body, it needs constant renewal, regeneration, and to heal any possible damage that might be occurring. And coincident with everything that we're experiencing is being inundated with many neurotoxins that are being sprayed in the sky, that we're getting through food sources, through medicine, and every way we look, that is rapidly breaking down our neurology, which, you know, in my opinion, is the reason why we have epidemic neurological degenerative disorders that were once rare when I started my career a long time ago, but now seem to be the new normal. And so that's bad enough. But then when you consider that we're shutting down our ability to produce new neuron stem cells and not even be able to repair ourselves because of the impact on our social interactions and intimacy with other human beings, that's just one consequence that most people don't even consider. So this is going to, like you say, Crow, this is going to be biting people for a long time. But to end that little comment on a positive note, those of us that are using this as an opportunity and to go a little bit deeper into investigating who we are and what our purpose on this plane is in the first place, that allows us to be open to other available resources that can overcome everything that we're talking about, at least on an individual basis. And I believe the folks that are doing that, and there's a lot of us, you know, it is creating a new collective that is the solution to the problems that we're facing right now.
You know, it's interesting, as I began to realize, I don't know, some months ago, what was really going to, you know, Jason had me create a t-shirt that said something to the effect of the only contagion is fear. And after he had me make the image, I'd been thinking about these ideas, and I came to realize that the bars on the prison, or the intended bars on the prison, The cause will be fear, but those bars are really going to be commerce. And I think what you just said is really where we're going to see a lot of people emerge far beyond where they would have been had none of this happened. And on a par, maybe, where they're going to have to be reckoned with, because it's one thing to say the people responsible for this are advanced. Well, maybe they do have more abilities, but I can't accept advanced. If you can't have compassion for other living things in this place, whoever created it, then you're missing something. And I think you can logically work that out. But to get back to the point, commerce is really going to be the bars, or the intended bars to this prism. If we go back to the old cliches like money is the root of all evil, we came into this thing where seeking money and seeking better paycheck and a big bank account and entertainment and all these things as normal, that's getting reevaluated by the people who are going to survive this and come out stronger than they went into it, probably. And I think that's a plus in the long run. The unfortunate part of that is there's probably a lot of people who were not fare so well. They're going to get sifted through the colander because they're still stuck in the idea of what is actually the importance of entertainment or the internet or media or movies or any of this stuff that had become so normalized before we went into this. But at the last moment, when you stop and evaluate, there's really no value at all unless you want to assign a value to killing time. And money's not far off that assessment. I mean, what do you think, Bear?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why a long time ago, human productivity currency, because it really is an electrical productive event, if you look at that way. So they redefined human currency, which is a very natural product of a sentient being. They created a monetization of currency, because then our just normal creative energy flow, it positioned them as a middleman by creating these little tokens that evaluate little units of human productivity. And that was the beginning of the end there, and we all kind of fell for it. And it also brings us right front and center to the problem we have in medicine these days, or any occupation. And that is that with that monetization of human currency, vocation, which is defined as your true soul purpose, what you're really supposed to do for your own evolution and for a contribution to the greater collective, has been usurped into an occupation where you spend units of time in order to make money, rather than really being able to, or giving the opportunity to ponder that you should be searching for your vocation, your true purpose. And then in the art and science of medical practice, that means that now you can spend a lifetime really investigating and perfecting your art. And doctors now, because we are monetized, our schools are very compartmentalized, so that you can master one little component that will in fact serve the agenda very well, to keeping the collective consciousness into a very compartmentalized consciousness. And then doctors will also justify it in saying, well, even the open-minded practitioners to say, well, yeah, I'd like to practice the way the old masters used to, but who has the ability to spend a lifetime, perfecting that? And also, when it comes down to my practice, it would require that I spend ample time with people that it's not going to really serve my bottom line to service my office, pay my employees, and allow me to make a good living. And I know that firsthand, because over the years, I've had a number of doctors request to do an apprenticeship with me, and I accepted a few individuals in, and it always got to that point where they said, well, this is fantastic, but how the heck can I make this work in a commercial practice? So somehow we have to, individuals that want to get off of those train tracks, including medical practitioners, we have to, again, be a little bit more resourceful and figure out a creative way around that in order to achieve that. Now, I figured that out for myself, so I could do that, and it worked very well, but it's an individual journey. It's not always easy. Sometimes you even take a lot of arrows in your back in the process. But Yeah, that's where we find ourselves now. And so people are going to practitioners, even alternative practitioners these days, in order to find solutions for their problems. And we really don't have a unified science or training system to make doctors complete. So what we're doing on our end is creating independent resources so that not only can we live and work the way we feel is right for us, but also create prototypes so that other people can maybe be inspired and figure it out for themselves also.
Well, it's a trap right from the beginning, isn't it? Because anyone coming out with the title doctor from school is already fighting this massive burden of debt that they're going to carry on their backs for God knows how long. So it seems like the whole thing is set up for failure and control right from the get-go.
I paid off my student loans completely, which was graduate school, various medical schools and alternate trainings that I did. And I had ways to creatively finance myself along the way, but I did have to incur some debt just to make it through all that. And that was at a time where things weren't nearly as expensive as they are now. But still, it took me until I was 45 years old to pay all that off. I did it, and but now, how the heck do you do what I did all those years ago? It would be pretty challenging.
Yeah, we've come a long way. I've read about a lot of Chinese medical ideas from days gone by. There's claims in a number of acceptable places that I have read that I find acceptable, where there were actually numbers of doctors in China that didn't get paid if they didn't heal. We're a million miles away from those ideas right now, but this is the whole thing. It's my assumption that back when that saying was relevant and current, that mostly it was almost like the apprentice idea, right? So the doctor took someone in and trained them up, so debt wasn't really even built into it. And this brings me into what I've been looking at for a number of months, maybe just over a year now. I've gone back to all the old alchemical symbolic ideas, the tarot, the Marseille tarot deck, and other things. And I've revisited them for pretty specific reasons. But one of the things is I began to realize that there's this idea, and this is why I brought up commerce, that truly money is the root of all evil, and by extension, commerce. That as long as you have a society that's involved in commerce and the way that we do it, you're never going to get rid of the kind of dark side of the force. And as I begin to look at the older ideas, it seems to me that what they recognize as before the fall, for people who read the Bible, that would be like Garden of Eden times, before all these bad things happen and we get booted out. In other traditions, it's always the same story. There's a fall. Things they recognize are the sun, the stars, the moon, and nature. That's what they recognized before the fall, as far as I can tell, which is rather ironic because the planets are almost certainly, or maybe even directly pointed at, as not part of that Eden-like pre-fall idea. And what you'll notice in those old alchemical ideas is that nowhere is commerce a part of that idea.
I see the number 12.
Well, when you live in nature, things become very apparent.
29,
and
8.
We're fortunate enough to live in that kind of environment. And I go into town,
12.
maybe once every 2 weeks briefly, and I can't wait to go home. And town to me is a kind of an idyllic, old American style town. We live far
29.
apart from cities. But when you live in nature, the more time you spend, you're operating within a different context. The things that concern most people these days really aren't a concern because they all seem pretty small compared to what you're just observing and experiencing around you. Now, we use money and have to go through all that ourselves, so we aren't isolated from the problem. But living the way we do, it is a good constant reminder that all of those other things are, in fact, fictions. And those fictions, unfortunately, have become pretty much the sole reality of most people these days. You're talking about getting paid only for results. Also, the villages, the communities would support people in their proper vocation, especially including a physician or whatever you want to call it, because they recognize that individual needed to perfect and go to the deepest levels of their art so they could be useful to the rest of the community. So it was very important to just make sure that the basic essentials of living were available to those people, because the community did not want them to be encumbered with out there trying to do a day job and just try to do the best they can on their medical practice on the side. They wanted those people good, but we've really strayed away from that for a pretty long distance in time. And, you know, you mentioned planetary influences and so forth. Well, that gets into the basic hermetic principles of as above, so below. And that's not some kind of metaphysical concept. That is a reality, because the more you understand the nature of our universe, and I think we discussed this a little bit last time we chatted, I think the individual that was the greatest link between metaphysics and what perceived as science these days was Walter Russell. And early on, even before my medical training, I was already involved in metaphysical studies, just because on some level it just seemed to be, I just seemed